The morning sun spilled through the tall windows of the Capitol, building as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez walked briskly through the marble hallways. She clutched a blue folder filled with climate data, statistics, and talking points. Today was important. The Joint Committee hearing on climate policy funding had been scheduled for months, and she had prepared extensively. "Big day," said Sam Miller, her chief of staff, matching her quick pace. "They're going to try to derail this bill," Alexandria replied, her voice calm but determined. "We can't let that happen." The committee room was already filling up when they arrived. Rows of polished wooden desks formed a half circle around the witness table. Staffers hurried about, placing water glasses and notepads at each seat. Journalists gathered in the back, cameras ready. Alexandria spotted Senator John Kennedy across the room. The Louisiana senator was chatting with two colleagues, gesturing with his hands as he spoke. His signature glasses sat low on his nose, and his Southern charm was on full display as he laughed at something one of them said. "He's going to be trouble today," Sam whispered, nodding toward Kennedy. Alexandria smiled slightly. "He always is." She took her assigned seat and arranged her materials neatly. The climate bill represented everything she had fought for since entering Congress. It proposed significant funding for renewable energy projects, coastal protection initiatives, and transition programs for communities dependent on fossil fuels. The legislation had gained surprising momentum. But the final committee hurdle would be the toughest. Chairman Richard Howard, a veteran congressman from Ohio, called the session to order with 3 taps of his gavel. The room fell silent. "Today we continue our examination of Bill H.R. 4587, the Climate Resilience and Energy Transition Act," Howard announced. "We'll begin with opening statements from committee members, followed by questions for our panel of experts." The first hour passed with predictable statements from both sides. Democrats emphasized urgency and opportunity. Republicans focused on costs and implementation challenges. Alexandria took notes throughout, occasionally whispering to Lisa Morgan, her senior policy advisor who sat behind her. When Kennedy's turn came to speak, he adjusted his microphone and removed his glasses. His Louisiana drawl filled the chamber. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to address what I believe is a fundamental misunderstanding about energy policy in America today." Kennedy paused, scanning the room before continuing. "My friends across the aisle have presented this bill as some kind of magic solution. Spend $1 trillion, and suddenly the weather gets better and everybody has a good-paying green job." Soft laughter rippled through the Republican side of the committee room. "Well, where I come from, we believe in looking at what things actually cost. Real numbers, not fairy tales. This legislation," he held up his copy of the bill, "reminds me of my nephew Billy's Christmas list. It's lots of expensive things, no thought about who's paying for them." More laughter, louder this time. "It's like we're being asked to invest in a unicorn farm." Sounds magical, but last I checked, unicorns don't exist. Alexandria felt her frustration building. She'd heard these same talking points for years, dismissive analogies that ignored the scientific consensus in economic research. Supporting climate action, she wrote unicorn farm in her notes and underlined it twice. Kennedy continued. "The people of Louisiana don't oppose clean energy. We juxtapose bankrupting our state to pay for it. This bill would eliminate thousands of jobs in the energy sector with nothing but promises to replace them." As Kennedy spoke, Alexandria noticed how effectively he connected with everyone in the room. His folksy manner made complex policy disagreements seem like simple, common sense. It was precisely this approach that made him dangerous to her cause. "So, while I respect the passion behind this proposal," Kennedy concluded, "I cannot support legislation that would harm the very people I was elected to represent." "Thank you, Mr. Chairman." Several Republican members nodded in agreement. "Chairman." Howard thanked Kennedy and called the next speaker. Alexandria felt a tap on her shoulder. Lisa leaned forward and whispered, "He's using the same arguments from the pipeline hearing last year." Complete misdirection. Alexandria nodded slightly. She knew Kennedy's claims about job losses were exaggerated. The bill actually included $50 billion specifically for worker retraining and transition assistance. His unicorn farm comment particularly bothered her. It reduced serious climate science to a children's fantasy. The morning continued with testimonies from experts. Dr. Ellen Russell from the Environmental Protection Agency presented data on rising sea levels affecting coastal communities, including parts of Louisiana. Frank Burton, an economist from the National Energy Commission, discussed projected job creation in renewable sectors. Each expert faced tough questioning from both sides of the aisle. During a brief recess, Alexandria stepped into the hallway where reporters immediately surrounded her. Representative Ocasio-Cortez, what's your response to Senator Kennedy's characterization of the bill? Asked Ben Wilson from the National Daily Dot. Alexandria chose her words carefully. The bill is based on extensive research and economic modeling. It addresses the concerns Senator Kennedy raised, particularly regarding jobs in traditional energy sectors. Is there room for compromise? Another reporter called out. There's always room for good faith negotiation, she replied. We can't compromise on the science or the urgency of this crisis. Back inside, Alexandria watched Kennedy across the room. He was speaking with an aide, reviewing something on a tablet. Despite their political differences, she recognized his effectiveness. Kennedy connected with voters through stories and analogies, while she relied on data and moral urgency. Both approaches worked with different audiences. As the session resumed, Alexandria prepared for her questioning period. She had 15 minutes to address the expert panel and respond to points made earlier. Lisa passed her a note with additional talking points based on Kennedy's comments. The chairman's voice cut through her thoughts. The chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from New York, Miss Ocasio-Cortez, for 15 minutes. Alexandria straightened her papers and leaned toward the microphone. The room grew quiet. She could feel Kennedy watching her from across the chamber. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, she began. I'd like to address some misconceptions about this legislation, particularly regarding its economic impact. She turned to the expert panel. Dr. Russell, could you explain how the coastal protection measures in this bill would specifically benefit states like Louisiana? As Dr. Russell began detailing the benefits, Alexandria noticed Kennedy's expression change slightly. She had deliberately started with his home state, acknowledging his concerns while challenging his opposition. For the next 12 minutes, Alexandria methodically addressed each criticism raised by opponents of the bill. She cited specific studies contradicting Kennedy's job loss claims. She explained how the transition funding would work in practice, with examples from similar programs already showing success in Kentucky and West Virginia. With her remaining time, she turned to the core of her argument. When we talk about costs, we must consider the cost of inaction. What price do we put on homes lost to rising seas, on farmland rendered useless by drought, on communities destroyed by increasingly violent storms? She gathered her notes, making direct eye contact with Kennedy. Some have compared this legislation to fantasy, to unicorn farms. But there's nothing imaginary about the climate crisis. It's happening now, affecting real Americans, including those in Louisiana. The tension in the room was palpable. Everyone sensed the direct challenge to Kennedy's earlier statements. Chairman Howard shifted uncomfortably in his seat. My time has expired, Alexandria concluded. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The room buzzed with whispers. Kennedy scribbled something in his notebook, his expression unreadable behind his glasses. The exchange between them had set the tone for what would become an increasingly heated debate. As Alexandria sat back, Sam leaned forward. Well done, he whispered. But Kennedy looks like he's planning something. She nodded slightly. The real battle was just beginning. The afternoon session would bring direct debate between committee members, and Kennedy would have his chance to respond. Alexandria took a sip of water and prepared herself for what would come next. Lunch break arrived after 3 more hours of testimony. Alexandria grabbed a quick sandwich in the congressional cafeteria with Lisa and Sam. They sat at a corner table, speaking in low voices about the morning session. Kennedy is building toward something, Sam said, checking his phone for news updates. He's been too quiet since your statement. Alexandria nodded. He's waiting for the debate portion. It's when he'll come at me directly. Lisa scrolled through her tablet. Twitter is already going crazy over your response to his unicorn farm comment. Our base loves it, but we're getting the usual pushback from the other side. Alexandria took a bite of her sandwich, considering her next move. The afternoon session would allow direct exchanges between committee members, no more experts as buffers. Just elected officials challenging each other's positions. We need to stay focused on the facts, Alexandria said. Kennedy wants to make this emotional about jobs versus environment. We can't let him frame it that way. As they returned to the committee room, Alexandria noticed several new faces in the press section. Word had spread about the brewing confrontation between her and Kennedy. Ratings gold for cable news networks. Chairman Howard called the afternoon session to order. We will now proceed with direct debate on the legislation. Each member will have 10 minutes for statements or questions to other members. I remind everyone to maintain decorum and address all comments through the chair. Alexandria watched as Kennedy whispered something to an aide, who nodded and hurried out of the room. Whatever he was planning, he seemed confident. For committee. Members spoke before Kennedy's turn came. When Chairman Howard called his name, the Louisiana senator adjusted his tie and leaned toward the microphone. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to address some points raised by the gentlewoman from New York this morning. He looked directly at Alexandria, his expression pleasant but determined.
Representative
Ocasio-Cortez suggested that my concerns about job losses were exaggerated. Perhaps she hasn't visited the communities I represent. In Terrebonne Parish alone, over 5,000 families depend on the energy industry for their livelihoods. Kennedy's aide returned, slipping a folder onto the desk in front of him. I have here, he continued, holding up the folder, impact assessments from Louisiana State University's Economic Research Center. Their projections show that under this legislation, my state would lose between 25 and 30,000 jobs in the next 5 years. He opened the folder and read from a page inside, and I quote, "The proposed transition funding, while substantial on paper, would cover less than 40% of displaced workers based on current qualification requirements." Alexandria made notes quickly. She knew this report. It used outdated job classifications that didn't account for transferable skills. But Kennedy was presenting it as definitive evidence. Now, I appreciate the gentlewoman's passion, Kennedy continued, his drawl becoming more pronounced. Lord knows we need more of that around here. But passion doesn't pay mortgages. Good intentions don't put food on the table. He removed his glasses, a move Alexandria recognized as his tell when preparing to deliver a practiced line. We're not talking about fantasy creatures like unicorns here. We're talking about real people. People I was elected to protect. Alexandria felt her frustration rising. Kennedy was skilled at this, appearing reasonable while completely misrepresenting her position. She watched the clock, waiting for her turn. 2 more members spoke, then Chairman Howard called her name. Alexandria took a deep breath and began. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to respond to several points made by the senator from Louisiana. She arranged her notes carefully, determined to maintain her composure. Senator Kennedy referenced a study from Louisiana State University projecting job losses. What he failed to mention is that this study was commissioned by Gulf Energy Partners, a fossil fuel lobbying group, and uses outdated job classification models. Kennedy raised his eyebrows but remained silent. I have here, Alexandria continued, holding up her own folder, an independent analysis from the National Bureau of Economic Research showing that this bill would create a net gain of 12,000 jobs in Louisiana alone, primarily in construction, manufacturing, and technical services. She looked directly at Kennedy. But more importantly, this bill includes $50 billion specifically for worker retraining and transition assistance. That's not a fantasy. That's a real investment in real people. Alexandria could see she had the committee's attention now. Even the Republican members were listening carefully. Senator Kennedy speaks of protecting his constituents. I couldn't agree more with that goal. But the greatest threat to coastal Louisiana isn't this legislation. It's the rising seas and strengthening hurricanes that this bill aims to address. She pulled out a photograph and held it up. This is Grand Isle, Louisiana, after Hurricane Laura. 90% of structures damaged or destroyed. The very communities Senator Kennedy wants to protect are being washed away. While we debate whether climate change is a unicorn, the room was completely silent now. Alexandria rarely used visual aids, but this image of devastation in Kennedy's home state was powerful. With all due respect to my colleague from Louisiana, she continued, her voice rising slightly with emotion, these tired talking points about economic feasibility ignore the mountains of evidence presented by actual economists. They ignore the lived reality of the climate crisis affecting his own constituents right now. She paused, looking around the room before focusing back on Kennedy. Senator Kennedy's approach to climate science reminds me of my uncle trying to fix a computer by hitting it, she said, her voice sharp and clear. It's performative, it's outdated, and frankly, it's become something of a joke in policy circles. Gasps echoed through the chamber. She had crossed an invisible line. Personal attacks, however mild, were considered bad form in committee hearings. Representative Paul Goodwin visibly winced. Chairman Howard nervously tapped his gavel. The gentlewoman will remember to address her comments through the chair, Howard warned. I apologize, Mr. Chairman, Alexandria said, not sounding particularly sorry. My point is that we cannot continue to treat science like it's a matter of opinion. The evidence is clear. The solutions are available, and the funding in this bill is both necessary and economically sound. She finished her remaining points quickly, aware that she had created a moment that would dominate the news cycle. As she concluded, she noticed Kennedy writing something in his notebook, his expression unreadable behind his signature glasses. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the remainder of my time. Chairman Howard nodded stiffly. The chair recognizes Senator Peterson from Minnesota. Alexandria felt Lisa tap her shoulder from behind. Bold move, she whispered. Kennedy looks calm, but his aide is frantically texting someone. The next 15 minutes passed in a blur as Senator Peterson spoke about agricultural impacts of the bill. Alexandria barely heard him. She was preparing for Kennedy's response, which would surely come. The joke comment had been unplanned. A moment of genuine frustration, breaking through her usually disciplined approach. Sam slipped her a note. Kennedy has requested additional time for rebuttal. Chairman likely to grant after Peterson finishes. Alexandria nodded slightly. This was it. The confrontation was about to escalate. She took a sip of water and straightened her papers, aware that every camera in the room was capturing her reactions. Chairman. Howard's voice cut through her thoughts. Senator Peterson yields back. The chair recognizes Senator Kennedy for a brief rebuttal. Kennedy adjusted his tie and leaned toward the microphone. The room fell completely silent in anticipation. Kennedy took his time adjusting his papers. The silence in the room grew heavy as everyone waited for his response to Alexandria's joke comment. His calm demeanor stood in sharp contrast to the tension filling the chamber. Well now, Kennedy, drawled his southern accent thicker than usual. I appreciate the Congresswoman's passion. Lord knows we need more of that around here. He paused and took a sip of water. The tension in the room was palpable. Journalists leaned forward in their seats, sensing a moment worth capturing. But you know where I come from. We learn that when you point a finger at someone, you've got 3 pointing back at yourself. His calm tone contrasted sharply with Alexandria's fiery delivery minutes before. Kennedy put down his water glass and looked directly at Alexandria. His voice remained even, almost gentle. The Congresswoman mentions evidence, he continued. I've got some right here. He held up a folder different from the one he'd shown earlier. These are letters, real letters from real people back home. He opened the folder and pulled out a sheet of paper. This one's from Mary Goodari in Homa. She writes, My husband has worked on oil rigs for 22 years. It paid for our home, our children's education, and my mother's medical care. We want clean air and water too, but we need time to adapt. Kennedy set the letter aside and looked up. Mary's not a lobbyist. She's not a political donor. Just a citizen worried about her family's future. Alexandria watched him carefully. Kennedy was redirecting the conversation away from her criticism and back to his core message about real people. It was skillfully done. The Congresswoman showed us a picture of Grand Isle after Hurricane Laura, Kennedy continued. A terrible tragedy that affected many of my constituents. What she didn't mention is that those same people rebuilt their community with paychecks from the very industry this bill targets. He removed his glasses, looking directly at Alexandria. You can call me a joke if you want, That's your right. But those families don't think it's very funny. Neither do I. The chamber erupted in applause from the Republican side while Democrats sat in uncomfortable silence. Chairman Howard tapped his gavel several times. "Order, please," Howard called. "Out. This is not a rally." Kennedy wasn't finished. Once the room quieted, he continued with the same measured tone. "I may not have all the fancy economic models the Congresswoman references, but I do have common sense. And common sense tells me that when you take away someone's livelihood, you better have something concrete to replace it with. Not promises, not theories, something real." He put his glasses back on and shuffled his papers together. "Mr. Chairman, I respect the Congresswoman from New York. I truly do. She fights hard for what she believes in. But suggesting that those who disagree with her approach are jokes, that doesn't help us find solutions. And solutions are what our constituents sent us here to find." Kennedy's rebuttal had been masterful. No direct attacks, no raised voice. Just a calm dismantling of Alexandria's position while claiming the moral high ground. The contrast between their styles couldn't have been clearer. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the remainder of my time." Chairman Howard nodded. The chair recognizes Representative Martin from California. Alexandria felt a mix of emotions. She knew Kennedy had effectively turned her moment of frustration against her. The joke comment had been a mistake it gave him an opening to appear reasonable while painting her as disrespectful. Lisa leaned forward and whispered, "We need to request time for a response." Alexandria shook her head slightly, extending. "This back and forth would only make things worse. It's better to let it cool down and address it later in a more controlled setting." Representative Martin's comments passed in a blur as Alexandria considered her next move. On the bill tomorrow, she needed to salvage what she could and find a way to counter Kennedy's narrative. The remainder of the afternoon session continued with other members making statements. Alexandria took notes, but said nothing more. When Chairman Howard finally adjourned for the day, reporters immediately rushed toward both her and Kennedy. Representative Ocasio-Cortez. "Do you stand by your characterization of Senator Kennedy as a joke?" shouted one reporter. "Senator Kennedy, will you be filing an ethics complaint about the personal attack?" called another. Alexandria gathered her materials quickly. "No comments right now," she told the press, as Sam and Lisa formed a protective barrier around her. They moved swiftly toward the exit. In the hallway, they found a quiet corner to regroup. "He played that perfectly," Sam said, checking his phone. "Twitter is blowing up. Both sides are claiming victory, but the joke comment is getting the most attention." Alexandria took a deep breath. "I let my frustration show. That was a mistake." "Maybe," Lisa said, "but it's also gotten more attention to the actual bill than we've seen in weeks. People are actually discussing climate policy because of this exchange." Alexandria looked at her phone as notifications poured in. Text messages from colleagues, emails from constituents, alerts from news organizations. The confrontation had clearly struck a nerve. "We need to get ahead of this," she said. "I won't apologize for challenging his position, but I should clarify that I meant his approach to climate science is outdated, not that he personally is a joke." Sam nodded. "Good, I'll set up a brief press statement. Nothing too defensive, just a clarification." As they walked toward Alexandria's office, They passed Kennedy speaking with a small group of reporters in the rotunda, looked completely at ease, smiling, and speaking in his unhurried manner. "No, no, I don't take it personally," they overheard him saying.
Yes.
"The Congresswoman is passionate about her beliefs. I'm passionate about mine. That's democracy at work." Alexandria noticed how effectively Kennedy was handling the situation. No outrage. No demands for an apology. Just calm confidence that made her comments seem petty by comparison. Back in her office, Alexandria found her team already managing the fallout. Her communications director, Greg Peters, was fielding calls from major news outlets. "MSNBC wants you live at 7, Greg said. CNN is offering a segment at 8. Fox News too, surprisingly." Alexandria shook her head. "No cable hits tonight. Let's put out a written statement first. I need time to think about this." She sat at her desk and began drafting her response. The words came slowly at first, then faster as she found her focus. "This isn't about me or Senator Kennedy," she wrote. "It's about the climate crisis and the future of communities across America, including those in Louisiana. I regret that my choice of words has distracted from the substance of this critical debate." As she worked on the statement, Sam entered with a tablet. "You should see this," he said, placing it in front of her. The screen showed Kennedy on a conservative news channel. The Chiron read, "Sen. Kennedy responds to AOC's joke comment." "Turn it up," Alexandria said. Kennedy's voice filled the room. "Look, I've been called worse things by better people," he said with a slight smile. "What concerns me isn't the Congresswoman's opinion of me. It's that we're missing a chance to find common ground. There are parts of this bill that make sense. There are parts that don't. Instead of trading barbs, we should be trading ideas." Alexandria was surprised. Kennedy was walking a careful line, playing to his base, while also appearing open to compromise. It was politically shrewd. "He's positioning himself as the reasonable one," Lisa observed. Alexandria nodded slowly, and creating an opening for negotiation at the same time. She turned back to her statement, reworking the conclusion. If Kennedy was signaling willingness to find common ground, she needed to match that tone without backing down from her core principles. "The science is clear," she wrote, "but the path forward must include everyone, especially those whose livelihoods are most directly affected. I remain open to good faith discussions about implementation timelines and transition support. What I cannot compromise on is the urgent need for action." She handed the draft to Greg. "Send this out as soon as it's polished. And let's see if we can get on the same programs as Kennedy tomorrow. Not to fight, but to reset the conversation." As evening fell over Washington, Alexandria knew this confrontation had changed the dynamic around the climate bill, or it would bring new challenges and perhaps new opportunities. The joke comment might have been a mistake, but what mattered now was how she responded to Kennedy's unexpected olive branch. By the next morning, the exchange between Alexandria and Kennedy dominated the news cycle. Every major network played clips of their confrontation on repeat. Political analysts dissected each word and gesture. Social media buzzed with hashtags, supporting both lawmakers. Alexandria woke early after a restless night. She checked her phone to find hundreds of notifications. Her statement had been released late last night, but Kennedy's calm response was getting more attention. Sam called. As she was getting ready for the day, "Morning shows are all over this," he said. "Kennedy is scheduled for 3 of them. We've got offers from Morning America and the Daily Start." "Book the Daily Start," Alexandria replied. "Their audience is younger and more likely to understand." The context of the climate discussion. She arrived at the studio an hour later. The production team rushed her through makeup and sound checks. The host, Diane Weber, greeted her warmly, but Alexandria could sense her excitement about the potential for dramatic television. "We're hoping to get into the substance of the climate bill," Diane said as they prepared to go live. "But obviously, viewers are interested in your exchange with Senator Kennedy." Alexandria nodded. "I understand. But I hope we can focus on what matters, the actual policy." The red light on the camera turned on, and Diane's professional smile widened. "Good morning, America." Today we're joined by Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez following yesterday's heated exchange with Senator John Kennedy over the Climate Resilience Act. Representative, thank you for joining us. Thank you for having me, Diane. Let's get right to it, Diane said, leaning forward. Yesterday you referred to Senator Kennedy's approach to climate policy as a joke. Do you stand by that characterization? Alexandria had prepared for this. What I was addressing was the outdated approach of dismissing climate science and economic research. My word choice was poor, and I regret that it has distracted from the substance of this critical debate. Senator Kennedy appeared on Capitol Morning earlier today, Diane said. Let's take a look at what he had to say. The monitor showed Kennedy in his characteristic relaxed pose, speaking with the host of the rival morning show. I've served in the Senate long enough to develop thick skin, Kennedy said with a slight smile. The Congresswoman is passionate, and sometimes passion leads to colorful language. I'm more concerned about finding solutions than arguing over words. The clip ended, and Diane turned back to Alexandria. Seems to be taking the high road. Your response? Alexandria nodded. Senator Kennedy is skilled at appearing reasonable, and I respect that. Let's not lose sight of what this is really about. Communities across America, including in Louisiana, are facing climate disasters right now. The bill we're debating contains practical solutions based on extensive research. She leaned forward slightly. This isn't about me or Senator Kennedy. It's about whether we have the courage to act before it's too late. For the next 5 minutes, Alexandria steered the conversation toward the actual provisions of the bill, the job creation potential, infrastructure investments, the support. For vulnerable communities, Diane kept trying to pull the discussion back to the personal conflict, but Alexandria remained focused. As the interview ended, Diane made one last attempt at drama. Will you be apologizing directly to Senator Kennedy when you see him today, Alexandria? Smiled. Senator Kennedy and I will undoubtedly have many conversations about this legislation. I look forward to discussing how we can find common ground while still addressing the urgent climate crisis. Back in her office, Alexandria found her team monitoring the media coverage. Lisa handed her a tablet showing clips from Kennedy's morning show appearances. He's being very strategic, Lisa said. Notice how he keeps emphasizing that there are parts of the bill that make sense without specifying which parts. Alexandria watched Kennedy's easy Southern charm working its magic on the hosts. He was neither attacking her directly nor fully opposing the bill. Instead, he was positioning himself as a reasonable voice open to compromise, but only on his terms. He's setting up for amendments, Alexandria said. He'll try to water down the emissions targets and extend the transition timeline. Sam nodded. The vote is scheduled for tomorrow. We're hearing some moderate Democrats are getting nervous after yesterday. Kennedy's giving them cover to push for changes. Alexandria paced the office. We need to talk to those moderates before Kennedy does. What's our count looking like? Greg checked his notes. We had a solid majority yesterday morning. Now we're looking at maybe a 2-vote margin. 3 members are wavering. Who? Alexandria asked. Williamson, Patel, and Rodriguez, Greg replied. All from districts with energy interests. Alexandria nodded. I'll talk to them personally. Set it up. Throughout the day, Alexandria moved through the Capitol building, meeting with colleagues and making her case. Some were supportive, others concerned about the political fallout from her confrontation. With Kennedy, the moderate Democrats were particularly worried about attack ads, painting them as job killers if they supported the bill without amendments. Late in the afternoon, as Alexandria was leaving a meeting with Congressman Rodriguez, she rounded a corner and came face to face with Kennedy himself. They were alone in the hallway, no staff or reporters in sight. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Kennedy smiled slightly. Quite a day we're having, Congresswoman. Alexandria nodded. Indeed. Senator Kennedy gestured toward a nearby bench. Got a minute? Alexandria hesitated, then nodded. They sat down, an unusual moment of quiet in the otherwise chaotic day. You know, Kennedy said after a moment. Back home we have a saying, a good gumbo needs both spice and time. Alexandria raised an eyebrow. That applies to climate legislation. How exactly? Kennedy chuckled. The spice, that's the urgency you bring to this issue. It's necessary. Wakes people up. He paused. But the time, that's what my folks need. Time. To adapt without losing everything they've worked for. Alexandria considered his words. This was the first time they'd spoken directly, without the performance aspect of committee hearings or media appearances. The problem is, Senator, we're running out of time. The climate doesn't care about our political timelines. Kennedy nodded. Slowly, I understand that better than you might think. I've seen the changes in Louisiana's coastline firsthand. Lost land that won't come back. He turned slightly to face her. I'm not opposed to action, Representative. I'm opposed to action that leaves my people behind. Alexandria was surprised by his candor. What would make this bill something you could support? Kennedy smiled. Now we're having a real conversation. He glanced at his watch. Unfortunately, I have a meeting in 3 minutes, but I've asked my staff to prepare some specific amendment language, nothing that guts the core of your bill, but changes that would help my state manage the transition. He stood up. I'll have it sent to your office this evening. Take a look. Maybe there's a path forward that doesn't require us to be at each other's throats. Alexandria stood as well. I'll review it carefully, Senator. Kennedy nodded and began to walk away, then paused and turned back. By the way, my uncle used to fix computers by hitting them too. Sometimes it actually worked. We winked and continued down the hallway. Alexandria couldn't help but smile slightly. Kennedy was impossible not to like personally, even when she strongly disagreed with his politics. Back in her office, Alexandria found her team still strategizing. Any progress with the moderates? Sam asked. Some, she replied. Rodriguez seems to be coming around. I just had an interesting conversation with Kennedy himself. She explained their hallway meeting and Kennedy's mention of amendments. Lisa looked skeptical. You think he's serious about finding middle ground? Or is this just a delay tactic? I don't know, Alexandria admitted. But he said he's sending specific language tonight. We should at least look at it. As evening approached, Alexandria's team prepared for the next day's vote. The media coverage had begun to shift from the personal drama to the actual content of the bill, exactly what Alexandria had hoped for. Even so, the vote would be close. At 7:30, an aide delivered a sealed envelope from Kennedy's office. Alexandria opened it and began reading the proposed amendments, her team gathering around her. Well, Sam asked after a few minutes, "How bad is it?" Alexandria looked up, a mix of surprise and thoughtfulness on her face. It's not what I expected. He's not asking to reduce the overall funding or change the emissions targets. She handed the papers to Lisa. He wants longer phase-in periods. For certain regions, stronger job guarantees for displaced workers, and more local control over implementation. Greg looked confused. That's it? Those are actually reasonable requests. Alexandria nodded slowly. Yes, they are. Which means Kennedy is being serious about finding a path to support this bill. The room fell quiet as they all considered the implications. After yesterday's heated exchange, no one had expected this turn of events. Kennedy, it seemed, was more complex than his public persona suggested. So what do we do? Sam finally asked. Alexandria took back the amendment proposals and studied them again. We negotiate. In good faith. We see if we can turn yesterday's confrontation into today's collaboration. Alexandria arrived at the Capitol early the next morning. She had spent most of the night reviewing Kennedy's amendments with her team. They had identified points they could accept, others they wanted to modify, and a few they needed to push. Back on, the vote was scheduled for late afternoon, giving them limited time to finalize any compromise. Kennedy's office confirmed he can meet at 9, Sam said as they walked briskly through the morning crowds. Small conference room, just principals and 1 staff each. Alexandria nodded. Good, the less people, the better chance we have of making this work. The conference room was tucked away in a quiet corner of the building. Kennedy was already there when Alexandria arrived, reading through papers with a young aide. He stood when she entered. Good morning, Representative, he said, extending his hand. I appreciate your willingness to discuss these amendments. They sat across from each other at the small table, with Sam and Kennedy's aide positioned at either end. The formal tension of the committee room was gone. replaced by a more businesslike atmosphere. "I've reviewed your proposals," Alexandria began. "Some of them make sense. Others would need modification to work within the bill's framework." Kennedy nodded. "I figured as much. Let's start with where we agree and work from there." For the next 2 hours, they worked through the amendments point by point. Kennedy wanted longer transition periods for energy-dependent communities. Alexandria agreed, but insisted on firm deadlines to prevent indefinite delays. They found middle ground on strengthened job guarantees for displaced workers, with Kennedy accepting higher funding levels in exchange. For more local input on program design, the most difficult point came over enforcement mechanisms. Kennedy wanted more flexibility for states, while Alexandria insisted on national standards to ensure accountability. "The problem with state-level enforcement," Alexandria explained, "is that pollution doesn't respect state boundaries. One state's lax standards affect everyone downstream." Kennedy leaned back in his chair. "The problem with federal enforcement is that Washington bureaucrats don't understand local conditions. What works in New York doesn't necessarily work in Louisiana." They had reached an impasse. Alexandria could see Kennedy's position was firm on this point. She wasn't willing to completely abandon federal oversight. After a moment of tense silence, Sam cleared his throat. "What about a hybrid approach? Federal standards with state-implemented enforcement plans. States propose how they'll meet the standards, with federal review and approval." Kennedy's aide nodded slowly, similar to how some environmental programs already work, could give states flexibility on implementation while maintaining national goals. Kennedy and Alexandria exchanged glances. It was a potential way forward. "I could work with that," Kennedy said cautiously, "provided there's a reasonable appeal process if the feds reject a state plan." Alexandria considered this, and provided there are clear consequences if states fail to meet the standards they commit to. Kennedy nodded. "That seems fair." By 11:30, they had worked through all the major points. The revised amendments would extend transition timelines for certain regions, strengthen worker protections, and create a hybrid federal-state enforcement mechanism. Both sides had compromised, but the core elements of the bill remained intact. "Think we have something we can both support?" Alexandria said as they prepared to leave. "But will this bring enough votes from your side?" Kennedy gathered his papers. "I can deliver at least 4 Republican votes. Maybe more if I really twist arms. Combined with your Democrats, that should be enough." Alexandria extended her hand. "Then we have a deal, Senator." Kennedy shook it firmly. "Indeed we do, Representative." As they walked out together, reporters spotted them and rushed over, cameras flashing. The sight of Alexandria and Kennedy leaving a meeting together, apparently on good terms after yesterday's confrontation, created an immediate buzz. "Representative Ocasio-Cortez, Senator Kennedy, have you reached an agreement?" One reporter called out. Kennedy glanced at Alexandria, who nodded slightly. They had anticipated this moment and discussed how to handle it. "The representative and I have had a productive conversation about some amendments to the Climate Resilience Act," Kennedy said, his drawl relaxed and confident. "We found more common ground than either of us might have expected." Alexandria stepped forward. "We've agreed on a package of amendments that address Senator Kennedy's concerns about implementation timelines and worker protections. While maintaining the bill's core climate goals, a reporter pushed to the front. "Does this mean you're withdrawing your characterization of Senator Kennedy's position as a joke?" Alexandria met the question directly. "What I should have said is that dismissing climate science is outdated. Senator Kennedy has shown today that he takes both the science and the economic concerns of his constituents seriously." Our conversation was substantive and respectful. Kennedy nodded. "And I appreciate the Congresswoman's willingness to consider amendments that protect vulnerable communities during this transition. Good policy requires listening to different perspectives." As the questions continued, Alexandria noticed something remarkable. She and Kennedy, who had been fierce opponents just yesterday, were now standing side by side, presenting a united front. Politics made for strange bedfellows indeed. After answering a few more questions, they parted ways to brief their respective colleagues on the compromise. Alexandria met with Democratic leadership, while Kennedy spoke with key Republicans by mid-afternoon. Word had spread throughout the Capitol about the unexpected alliance. Political analysts scrambled to understand how a heated confrontation had transformed into cooperation overnight. Cable news chirons blared. AOC and Kennedy reached surprise. Deal on climate bill. At 4 o'clock, the House reconvened for the vote. Chairman Howard called the session to order and announced that amended versions of the bill had been distributed to all members. Alexandria sat with her Democratic colleagues, occasionally glancing across the aisle where Kennedy was speaking, quietly with a group of Republicans. When the time came to vote, Alexandria watched the electronic board closely. The Democratic votes came in steadily, as expected. Then, one by one, Republican lights began changing from red to green. Kennedy had delivered on his promise, bringing 4 colleagues with him to support the amended bill. The final tally was 246 to 189. A surprisingly comfortable margin of victory. The bill would now move to the Senate with bipartisan support from the House, dramatically improving its chances of passage. As members began filing out of the chamber, Alexandria found herself face-to-face with Kennedy once more. "Congratulations, Representative," he said with a slight smile. "You got your climate bill. With your help," Alexandria acknowledged. "I didn't expect this outcome when I called your approach a joke." Kennedy chuckled. Politics is full of surprises. Sometimes conflict leads to unexpected cooperation. Alexandria nodded. "I learned something important from this experience, Senator." "What's that?" "That I shouldn't underestimate someone just because we see the world differently." "Your concerns about your constituents were genuine, even if I disagreed with your initial approach." Kennedy adjusted his glasses. "I learned not to dismiss passion as merely ideological. Your urgency on climate issues comes from a real place." He paused. "We'll still disagree on plenty of other issues, I'm sure." "Undoubtedly, Alexandria." "Agreed. But maybe we can disagree without the drama next time." "Where's the fun in that?" Kennedy replied with a wink. "But seriously, this is how Congress is supposed to work. Different perspectives finding common ground for the common good." As they parted ways, Alexandria reflected on the wild 48 hours they had just experienced. What had begun with her losing her cool and calling Kennedy's approach a joke had somehow ended with meaningful legislation that both could support. The media would focus on the personal drama and unexpected alliance, but the real story was that the political system had, for once, functioned as intended. Back in her office, Alexandria found her team celebrating the victory. Sam raised a water bottle and toast. 2 unexpected alliances and surprising outcomes. Alexandria smiled as she joined them. And 2, remembering that behind every political opponent is a person with genuine concerns and constituents they care about. Lisa checked her phone. Twitter is going crazy over this. Some people are angry about the compromise, calling it a sellout. Others are celebrating it as pragmatic progress. "Both sides will have opinions," Alexandria said. "What matters is that we've taken real action on climate change without leaving vulnerable communities behind. That's a win worth having." As the evening fell over Washington, Alexandria knew that tomorrow would bring new battles and new opponents. Politics never stopped. But she had learned a valuable lesson from her confrontation with Kennedy. Sometimes the path forward required listening to those you disagree with, finding unexpected common ground, and turning conflict into cooperation.